Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Darylyn and today we are spilling more tea and I'm gonna tell you why friends don't let friends invest in bad variegation and why unrooted cuttings of things like Alba Monstera are essentially a scam. All right, so I can get like pretty fired up about things like this sometimes. So the goal here is for this to come across less as a rant against things that people do that are a little bit shady and more as just like loving advice, me passing on my experience to some of the plant folks out there who maybe haven't seen as much mischief as maybe I have been burned the way that I have and know people who have. And, you know, we can all just like spread some love, spread some knowledge, and hopefully I can help you. Or even if you know these things, just maybe like a solid reminder. Because sometimes when we see plants that we want for a price that seems too good to be true, like all like logic goes out the window. So that's why I want to talk about this today. For those of us who have been involved in the online plant community, going back to kind of the houseplant boom, I'm sure that we all remember the times when literally any plant would sell for like whatever anyone asked for it. Because there were the plants that were like really popular and in demand and kind of like driving the surge. And then there were the plants that like everyone was just buying anyway for like inflated prices, just on the off chance that eventually they would, you know, go up a lot in value. And with a lot of variegated plants, this kind of like was a happy medium between these two things, because there were the high quality variegated specimens that literally people would just ask for whatever and someone would buy it. And then there were like the low quality variegated specimens where it was like a reverted mid cut or like a chunk or like an unrooted cutting. And the whole thing was, oh, well, you're trading off a guarantee of variegation for a much, much lower price so that you can get something that's in your budget, but you also can have a chance to get an elusive, expensive wish list plant that either you can't afford or that you can't justify spending the money on. So why does this irritate me? When it seems like, you know, a budget-friendly way to try and collect plants? Because this is why. This is why. Because these sellers are not being transparent with how much risk they are actually passing off to you. And even when you see the price on like reverted cuttings or unrooted cuttings or whatever, the price you're paying is still overvalued for what you're getting once you take into consideration like how much risk you're taking on and like how little of a guarantee that you have to actually get what you think you're paying for. I think that in general, people only post like the good parts about plants in groups. And so it's really easy to take notice of the posts where people are like, oh, my reverted Florida Beauty like gave me this beautiful variegated leaf, or my reverted strawberry shake gave me a half moon, or, you know, I let my reverted pink princess grow up a pole and it gave me this beautiful marbled leaf. Like, yeah, that happens, but it doesn't happen as often as people like really want you to think, especially as often as sellers want you to think. So I think it's just a good exercise to really like just touch on the fact that a lot of this stuff is not only like a risk, it's overpriced, but like these sellers know what they're doing. They're not doing you a favor by being like, oh, you know, here's some reverted cuttings for a discount, or oh, here's some nodes for a discount. Like, they know that the chance of actually getting a plant from that they can sell is low. And the reason that they're willing to part with it and give it to you for a little bit less than a sure thing is because they know that if they take the chance and grow it out and it comes out completely green or completely reverted, or if it rots and it dies, they're not gonna be able to sell it for anything. And I mean, you see these posts all the time and, you know, with strawberry shakes, like, how do I encourage variegation on my reverted strawberry shake? And it's like, how do you know that that was even ever attached to a plant that had variegation? Like, maybe it's just a regular red emerald philodendron. The answer is you have to just cut it and hope for the best. But if it's already completely reverted, especially if it was a mid cut that came out of, you know, a bud on a mid cut of a variegated plant, like that node's already spent. You can't cut it back to the variegated leaf and hope for the best at that point because that's already done. Yeah, I saw a post in a group this week about a variegated, it was a reverted Florida Beauty. The person who posted did. Good on them for asking, because I basically was like, do not pay more for that than you would pay for a Florida green. Because he was like, yeah, it's a mid-cut that put out completely reverted leaves. Don't pay more for that. The growth point, the bud that was on the variegated stem has already pushed green growth. Is it technically possible that maybe you could get some variegation from a plant like that? Yeah, sure. It's also possible that you could win the lottery. Maybe the lottery is like not the correct level of analogy of unlikelihood, but how confident do you feel playing scratcher cards? Like if you go into a gas station and you buy a scratcher, how confident are you that you're gonna win like more than you paid for the card? Usually you don't. And you almost never actually win like a significant amount of money off of a scratcher, like a couple $100. Getting beautifully variegated leaves growing out of a fully reverted plant is like the equivalent of going to a gas station and buying a scratcher and winning like $500. Like that does not happen very often. If you are looking for like a fun project for cheap and you understand that the likelihood that you're gonna get a plant that's got nice variegation, like forget like nice variegation even for a second, like any variegation, like a few speckles is gonna be low. I mean, don't like, just be aware that like you should not pay anywhere near the price for like even a low variegation specimen for something that is purported to be reverted, especially if it is a mid-cut that is throwing reverted growth, because that even more likely that the variegation did not carry through that bud. That is that. Like, I really do think that these sellers are comfortable like letting people have like a misleading idea of how likely it is that the growth is going to push through more variegation. And if they didn't think this, they would be keeping the plants and letting them grow out and selling them for more money. Like they just would. It's simple business. But they know that if they do that, and the plants don't push good color, then they're screwed. Like reverted pink princesses are worth basically nothing these days. I've seen people having a hard time selling like reverted pink princess cuttings for $20. I've seen them sit and nobody buy them. Same with like variegated Florida Beauty, like big Florida green leaves, like a plant that's mature and has big leaves. Like yeah, you could probably sell those for something, 50, 75 bucks or something. Or if you have a big full plant of it that's beautiful, you know, you could probably get a decent price for it, but you're not gonna get anywhere near what a Florida Beauty cutting goes for. I see people selling like unrooted Florida Beauty cuttings for like still a couple $100, and they don't tell you like how difficult it is to root them. Like if you ever ask a seller who's trying to sell you an unrooted cutting, how difficult is it to root it? They are always going to say, oh, it's super easy, obviously. But like, if it was so easy, why aren't they rooting them and selling them for more? Because it's actually not easy. Florida Beauties, just for the record, are one of the most difficult plants to root from unrooted cuttings. They are even sometimes difficult to root in air layering. I just cut my Florida Beauty and I had air layered 3 nodes. One of the nodes didn't root into the air layering. And I wish I had checked before I cut it, because now I have an unrooted Florida Beauty cutting. I'm like, well, that's really unfortunate. But that's the thing in general too about like these expensive variegated plants. It's like this like kind of misconception that I feel like sellers can kind of prey on sometimes, where it's like, you know, if you don't have the budget or the disposable income to pay a couple $100s for, you know, your wish list plant, you feel like you're doing the responsible thing by getting it at the most entry-level price point possible. But entry-level price point does not mean entry-level difficulty. And I think these sellers like really take advantage of the fact that like you in your brain are connecting like what you're buying with the plant that costs a lot. And you don't always put 2 and 2 together, that you're not paying for a plant, you're paying for a chance to have a plant. You're paying for a plant scratcher card. And like the odds are really not as good as you probably think. They really will tell you whatever you want to hear. And it's easy to believe things that you want to hear. But quite honestly, one thing I've found to be true in plants as well as in life in general is that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And it's better to just walk away. And if you are someone who doesn't have the budget and like even paying the price for something that is unrooted or reverted or low variegation or what have you to save money because you're trying to do the responsible thing for your budget, you are especially especially not the person who should get scammed and lose your money. Unrooted elbow cuttings are like a great example of this. Like one of the reasons why rooted elbows, like rooted, growing, established elbow monstera are so expensive is because they're actually not that easy to propagate, and people who say that they are full of it. They're full of it. They're extremely prone to rot. They're extremely prone to browning while they are establishing roots and growing. They're extremely like prone to the growth reverting to be more juvenile, even if it's an air layered top cutting. There's so many places where it can go wrong that it is way easier for sellers to just cut their plants and sell the cuttings for, you know, a little bit less than an established plant, but still a lot, still more money that I would want to like flush down the drain or put in the blender. So just keep in mind that there's a lot, especially if you're getting an elbow cutting shipped to you. You have no control over whether the seller waited until the plant was actually mature enough to cut it. You have no control over whether the seller sanitized their shears, whether they use best practices to keep the incision clean, whether or not they capped it with wax or used cinnamon, whether or not they pack it correctly, whether or not they let it dry out for too long, whether the plant is thirsty. Like there's so many different ways that unrooted elbow monstera can go wrong. And the other thing too about elbow monstera is that one of the reasons that they're so prone to rot is that the variegation runs through their aerial roots. And so sometimes it's really hard to see, but you could get an unrooted cutting that has a nice aerial root, but actually it's full of variegation and it just rots. And you'll be like, what the hell happened? And you'll have no way of ever knowing. I really, really just want to encourage those of you who are trying to be responsible and collect plants on a budget, but are dying for some like really like pricey plants, to be extremely, extremely careful about who you buy from. I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you save up your money and get an established plant. And then eventually, once that plant grows out, you'll have some potential to take cuttings and trade for other plants that you want. But just don't think it's ever worth it to invest in bad variegation, because chances are you're going to get burned. And like, I learned this personally the hard way, and this was devastating because I desperately wanted an elbow monstera back in like 2019 or whenever it was that like it really popped and became like the it plant that everybody wanted. I desperately wanted one, and I had enough money to be able to pretty much like buy whichever plant I wanted, and so I was very lucky. But the thing that I will say about having money to spend is that you are much less meticulous sometimes in how you spend your money, and you're much more likely to get taken advantage of. So this advice goes for everyone, not just people who are really on budgets. So I wanted one that looked a certain way, and I wanted to buy it locally because I wasn't like a fan of getting it shipped. And actually that was a good inclination, but back then there weren't a million bajillion sellers selling elbow monstera locally where I lived. So I found one at a local plant shop, and from the ad on Etsy, it sounded like it was a fully established plant. So I go to pick it up and it was $350, and I get there and it is not only not fully established, but it's just an unrooted cutting in water. And I was very naive, and they told me like, oh, you know, it really should be in moss, but we put them in water so that, you know, the customers like to see the roots. I was like, well, can I come back and pick it up once it's rooted? And they were like, we can't put it on hold, and really, you know, they're selling so quickly that none of them are fully rooted before they sell. And the plant had already kind of started putting out some little like water roots, and I thought that I was being responsible by choosing the plant that had already started to root, but they gave me really, really bad advice, which was to put the plant into moss. No, like once your plant is starting to root in one medium, don't move it. Like I bet you anything, if I just left the plant in water, it probably would have made it, but it didn't. I put it in moss, and it would start to root a little bit, and then it would die. And then it would start to root a little bit from a different spot, and it would die. Then my stem started to rot. And like once your stem starts to rot with an elbow, like good luck. Like that's pretty much probably gonna be terminal. Especially if they have a lot of variegation in the stem. So yeah, I had to slowly sit and watch this elbow die, and it was so sad. Yeah, eventually it succumbed, and I you know, $350 down the drain. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that this has happened to, where they think they've done their research, they think they've done their homework, they think they've asked all the right questions, they think it sounds like a, you know, a workable situation, and then it just isn't. And it turns out that actually the seller like should have never been selling the plant in that condition. And, you know, there's people out there that maybe will say like, well, you know, you shouldn't have bought it. And it's like, yeah, you know, you're right, but I didn't know better. So this is me hopefully helping everybody, maybe helping some of you out there who are thinking about maybe dropping a lot of money, maybe the most money you've ever spent on a plant, on something that's unrooted or something that's reverted to save money. Like, I'm just here to tell you, like, don't. It's not worth it. Like, chances are you are not gonna be the one who ends up winning a couple $100 on the scratch card. Chances are it's not going to happen. So just be careful. Once again, I would highly, 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 highly recommend saving up your money to buy a fully rooted established plant, because those are the plants where the seller has taken on all of the risk for you. That's why they're more expensive. So that's just my little rant / loving advice on that front. It can be really difficult, you know, for some reason, the plant market, like there aren't the same kinds of consumer protections as there are with other goods. And I think part of that is because the plant market is like so many small businesses, and usually the small businesses are the ones that really try and be more responsible because they don't have as high a tolerance for replacing things. So definitely it isn't small businesses, but like because there's so many like small operations out there, it's really hard to regulate them. And there's a lot of people that are selling plants under the table that don't want to pay taxes on the income and who just want to make a few bucks here and there. And like, they know that they can get away with saying like, you know, obviously no guarantee of variegation. But it's like, obviously no guarantee of variegation, and like actually explaining the amount of risk that you are taking on and how the amount of money you're paying isn't really a fair price for the amount of risk you're taking on, considering all the unknown variables you have no control over, are two different things. So that's my little opinion on that. Just keep in mind, this is my opinion. It is my opinion from learned experience and learned experience of other people who've been doing this for even longer than I have. And I feel like at this point, I've been around the block a few times. So take that for what it is. I hope that that's helpful to some people. Share your unrooted cutting purchase nightmare stories or reverted plant fails in the comments below. And I will see you guys in my next one. Bye.